we are going to enhance our application performance by creating a long-running operation process from scratch. And we are going to refactor an existing CSV import to leverage and use the new job operations. By doing that, we will improve speed, resilience, and free up resources. So let's get started. Let me show you what we are working with. This is an ASP.NET application, .NET 9, and it's basically, we have an entity framework. We are creating an entity framework context. We have a database that contain patient records table, and patient record consists of multiple things. We also have an endpoint, which is basically an import where we upload a file and we parse the file, check the header if it is valid or not, if it is containing the needed columns, then we loop through the file line by line, create a patient record, then doing some simulation for long-running process using task.delay, insert the patient record, save change, and so on. This is very bad to have something like that in your project, basically, because your API will need to finish importing the CSV in order to be free. You will notice that the client will be waiting for it to complete. By doing this delay, you will see why it's a bad idea to have something like that when importing, especially when you have a long file that you are trying to import. We're talking about patient records here. I created also a HTTP file to test. This is my endpoint to import, and I have a file patients.csv. It's here also, that contains few random patient records details. So let's start by testing this application. Let's see what's wrong with it. So if we run the application, first run, it will create the database and it's up and running now. Let me zoom out a bit. Okay. So let's go to the HTTP file and try to test. You will notice also that I'm in the endpoint. I'm doing a console.output. The patient record, the last patient is added to the list, and toString is basically being overridden to have first name and last name. So we will see in the console here the first name and last name for each patient record, basically. So going back to the HTTP file and let's run. It's running, and if we go to the log, you will see second by second we are reading the patient from the file, and then it's done. You will notice we have bulk insert for everything in the end. It's also not efficient. We will refactor that later on. So the idea is we don't want to make the user rely on the endpoint to upload the CSV, the patient records. We are going to have some kind of operation, job operation, where the user will upload a file. It will be stored somewhere. We'll talk about that in a bit. And that file will be processed in a different operation. In that case, it will be a background job, background service mainly. Let me stop the code here and start doing the thing. So first thing, we need to store the jobs in the database. So we need a table in the database containing all the jobs. So when the user upload a file, we will create a new record in that table saying, hey, I have a new job. So inside our data folder, I'm gonna create a new class, import job. You can do something generic here by having a job class table called jobs. Will contain all the jobs that you have in the system, and then you can inherit from it and create an import job from it. But for the sake of this demo, I'm gonna be very simple. It's one table called import job related to importing patient records, basically. So a job has an ID. It's a primary key. It will be an int. A job contain also, I'm gonna create a GUID, which is the domain ID. We are going to use this GUID where importing a file, we will return this ID, this GUID for the user. So later on, he can query another endpoint to get the actual status of that job. So basically it's like correlation ID that he can use it to track this job, if it is running, completed, failed, or so on. So we have a domain ID, fine. We need to have a name, file name. You upload a file, we create that file somewhere, and we save it. We need a file name for that file. I'm going to use the domain name plus the extension, which is CSV. Gonna make it required as well. A job has a status, so public job status, and let's create the enum. Public enum job status. Usually for enum, I always start with undefined. So if you don't set the value of the enum, it will take the 0, which is undefined in that case. So what status do we have? We have enqueued, running, we have completed, and we have failed. We can later on have canceled, but I'm not gonna deal with cancellation yet in this video. Now we have a status. Let's add few logging events here. So I can have a date time, which is created at. I can also have created by, but it's a simple application. We don't track who is the user. But if you are using authentication, you have the user ID, you can set the user ID here when creating the job. It's good for logging and history. So we have created at. We can have few date time related to the actual status. So again, it's a simple structure. I'm not gonna complex things just for the job thing. Date time, let it be nullable. We have started at, we can have completed at, we can have failed at. And for the failure, we can have also a nullable string, the failure reason. This is basically our structure, and let's add it into our entity framework context, dbset of import job, and let's call it import jobs like this. Go to program.cs, and I'm gonna actually change the connection string. I'm not going to the database to change that. So my hospital 2, so it's a new database. It will be created with a new table. So let's run. Notice we created a patient records table and import jobs, and we are ready. So we have our jobs ready now. What do we need to do? We need to refactor our endpoint here to, instead of creating all of this logic here, we need to save the file and create a new job record inside the table. So few things here that I would like to keep is basically validation. I would like to have my endpoint validate if it is a CSV and if it has some values. And also I would like to have the header being validated by having all the fields there. So this is like a good things to have. But after that, I don't want to keep on reading. I just want to save the file so I can use it later on. So saving the file, you have multiple options. You can save it in a blob storage where you can trigger another function or maybe a background service that will read from the blob storage. This is very good. It's relying on a different component, which is the blob storage. I want to keep this simple. So for that, I'm going to save the file inside a temp folder inside our application. Not the best solution, yes, I know, but for now, let's keep it simple. Gonna comment everything here. Let's keep the validation of the header, fine. And here, we need to save the file into a temp folder. So first thing, we need to validate if we have a temp directory. If not, we can create it and then we save the file. Let me create a new method. Save file to temp async, and we need to pass the file. Let's await this function and let's create this method. So let's first check if our directory exists. Directory.exist, let's call it temp. If we have a directory called, if we don't have a directory called temp, let's create that directory temp. And then we can create a temp file path, which is path.combine temp with file.file name. And here, I don't want to use the file name that is being sent from the user. It can be anything, and I want it to be unique. So for that, I'm going to back here, create a new GUID. So GUID job ID in that case equal GUID.new GUID, and let's pass it to the method here. And we can add a parameter. Now here I can do job ID.csv. It is a CSV. I'm making sure that only CSV is allowed. So it's fine to have the extension like this. So we created a path for our file. Now we can save the file. I from file contain a stream that I can use to save into a file. So how to do that? I can create a file stream, a new file stream. We need the file name, temp file path. We need it to be create and the file access to be write file dot open read stream, copy to async, and I'm going to copy it to file stream. Let's await this one here. Now this should be enough to save our file into the temp folder. So this is our first step, saving the file. Now what? Since we have context already, I can create a new job. So var job equal new import job. So a job need a file name, which is job ID.csv. A job needs a domain ID, which is job ID. And we have status, which is equal to enqueued. Created that, we can have datetime.utc now we can simply add it to the context. So context db context dot import jobs dot add async job, and let's save change. So this will create a job, and then we can return results dot okay. I'm gonna return like an object here, ID equal job ID, and we can have a message, something like file uploaded successfully, importing patient records. Let me remove this one from here. Now we have an import endpoint that will create a job and upload the file into a temp location. Let's run. Going to services. Let's create a request here. So we have the file name, the ID, and we have our message, file importing, etc. Now, if we go to the logs, you will see we inserted into import jobs, and that's it. And I think we will have a directory called temp here with a file containing all the CSV data that we had. So the user will import, we will going to save the file in our temp directory here to be processed later. Very good. Now, processing. How to process this file? We need something that is running behind the scene. And for that, we can use background services. To create a background service, simply create a new class. Let's call it import job background service, and we can inherit from background service. So we already have this abstract class that we can implement, and background service in our program.cs, we can register it by doing something like this. So we can say builder.services.add a hosted service, and we specify import job background service. This automatically will try to add this hosted service, our class, as a singleton. So make sure to remember this point here later on. We will gonna need that. And here we can implement our background service. Notice something, background service do implement iHosted service, and you only have one method to use. You don't need to deal with started, ended, but if you want, you can check iHosted service. You can implement the interface. So I'm going to do something very simple here. I'm gonna do a loop while not stopping token dot is cancellation requested. So while the app is not canceled, this is running always. You can use a periodic timer where you can use some kind of an interval saying every couple of minutes you are going to run this application, and then you do a loop through these ticks that you have. You can do that. Or maybe task.delay. But for now, fine, let's keep it simple. It's a while loop if not canceled. Okay, let me inject a logger here. So I logger of import job background service logger, and I can do logger.log information import job running, and let's do task.delay for 5 seconds. Make sure it's an async method, and we can pass the cancellation as well. So let's run. Yep, importing job running. 5 seconds, importing job running, and so on. So our background service is running, but remember that background services are being registered at singleton. So doing this will fail. If I need to inject ef context, this will fail. Why it's gonna be failed? Because our context is being registered as scoped, and you cannot use a scoped service inside your singleton service. So if I run this, I'm gonna fail on the building of the application, because hosted service is being singleton, and that is a problem. So how can we fix this? We can inject the iService scope factory. This will allow us to create a scope where we can resolve our context. So let's inject it, and here we can simply await using var scope equal service scope factory dot create async scope. And now we can say var context equal scope dot service provider dot get required service, and you specify EF context. So now I have access to the jobs that we have in the system. So I can do something very simple. For jobs equal await context dot import jobs dot where. So I need all the job that are status equal to include. So when you import a job, it will be in queue, it will be pending to be started. And let's do toList async. We can pass a cancellation token as well. Let me do a log here. So log information, the count of the jobs. I'm gonna keep the delay here for a second. So let's run. Now, total in queue job is 1. So we have a job already. And if we create a new process here, if we import a new job, then this is a new file that's been added. If you go back here, you will see total in queue jobs is 2. So our background job is being processing correctly the files, and then we can start actually importing the data. But before doing that, let me add a new endpoint here. So we have import patient record. I'm going to have another endpoint that will check the status of this patient record file process. So create a new class. I always like to keep my endpoints in a separate class without keeping everything in program.cs. So import patient records status endpoint. Well, that's a long name. It's a static class, and we will have a static I endpoint route builder. So we will have an extension method map import status this I endpoint builder endpoints. Here we can return endpoints in the end, and we can map get. This is our import, and we have ID segwid, and we can GUID ID. What else do we need? We also need to inject the context. Here we can simply get the job from the database. So var job equal context dot import jobs dot where x dot domain ID equal to ID. Let's do first or default async and do it await. Make sure the anonymous function here is async, and then we can check if job is null, return result dot not found. But if it exists, we can return results dot okay, similar to the import. So let's have a new object here. So ID equal job.domain ID, because don't return primary key as integer to the client. Use GUID for this kind of operations. So I can return the ID. I can return the status. So I have status equal job.status.toString. Let's return it as toString. And I can have created at, which is job.created at. I can have updated at. So here it could be started or failed at or job.completed at. And then we can have notes, job.failure reason for now. Go to the endpoint, the HTTP file. Let me create a new get import status, and we have get, same thing here with an ID. We already have 3 files, 2 files for now. Let's copy this ID here and put it here. Let's run our application, and here let's run. We got 404 not found. Why is that? Well, the endpoint is not found because we didn't register our endpoint here. App.map import status, something like that. Restart, go to the HTTP request, and let's query. We got the ID, status is in queue, created at this time, no updated at, no notes. Fine. Now we have an endpoint to check the status. we have an endpoint to create the file and save it in a temp location. Let's go to our background service to actually implement this logic. By default, you should not keep the business logic of your import stuff here is the background service. You can have a CSV parser class that you give it a stream or a file. It will parse it and generate list of patient records. And then you can call Entity Framework or any other service to insert the patient records into the database. So we have the list of in-queue jobs. We can loop through them. So jobs, loop through jobs. And for every job, you can read the file, import patients, right? To read the file, it's simply similar to what we had before. Read the file from a stream, line by line, create a patient record and save it. Or we can do var patients equal file dot read all lines. The path is path.combine temp with job.filename. Okay. Read all lines, skip the header, and now you have a list of strings for every patient record. What do we need to do next? Let's loop to the patients and first split patient values equal patient.split on comma, and then you can have a list of patient records, and then you can have patient records dot add the list of records values from this string, and then eventually you can import them by doing context dot patient records dot add range async, and you pass by the patient records. Await, and you can save a change. It's telling me that I can pass a cancellation token, so let's do that. So now you read everything and then you save it. This is fine, but don't do this when reading a file because it is very slow. Instead, you can create a reader, stream reader, and we need the path, string path equals this one, and reader, we have the path, and then let's skip the header, await reader dot read line async, pass a cancellation token. So we skip the header, and let me remove this one from here. We can do a while loop, while reader dot read line async cancellation token is not null and called patient. We should do await here. So what's this mean? Read the line. If it is not null, it's an object, and it is called patient, which is string. We can now split and add the patient records. So list of patient record, we removed the wrong one, patient record. So what's happening here? We are reading the file line by line. We are not reading all the file, putting in the memory, and then we are processing it. This should improve the performance a bit. And here I'm going to change how we are saving the file, basically by doing some kind of batches. So it's a small file that I had here, but you can calibrate your batches depending on the file that you are using. So it could be 100, it could be 1,000, it could be 500, it depends. So for this demo, I'm going to check if patient records dot count modulus of 5 equal to 0. So every 5 records, I'm going to import, save change, and then clear the patient record list, and eventually you will insert what remains from the patient record list. I'm going to remove this task.delay from here, and let's test this one here. Let's run. So we have something here that's not working because it's not finishing. It's always been running. And the problem is we didn't change the status of the job. So let me move all this logic here into a new method. Extract method, import patient records. So we import patient records. This is our method here. And I need to update the job. So job.status equal to running, job dot started at equal datetime dot UTC now, and then context dot save change. So now the job is going to be set as running. Let's run. Total in queue jobs is 0. Well, I'm gonna keep that task.await because it was very helpful. So await task.delay 5 seconds. Run. So no jobs, 5 seconds, no jobs. So we have 0 in queue jobs, but we also had something missing because if I go to the HTTP and query, it is running. We have updated at, which is the started at, but we don't have a completed yet. So for that, stop this one. Let's go to the background service. And once the patient record is imported, we can do job.status equal completed at equal datetime.utc now, and then save change. So now we can have start, running, completed. What about failure? How to save that? So basically, I'm going to have this one here inside that try catch. So try import. If it is failed, you can do something like, let's first log the error, and we can set job status equal to failed, job.reason equal to e.toString, fine, and job.failed at datetime.utc now. So how to simulate that we got a failure? I can simply delete the file, basically. So let's do a breakpoint here. Let's run. I'm gonna delete both of the files here. And in my endpoint, I'm going to upload a new file. Oh wait, we didn't debug. Debug. Let's run. I'm going to upload a file. Fine. Set the status as running. Fine. Save. Now import the file. Insert here. The file name is cf1. I'm going to be here. I'm going to delete the file. So file is deleted, and that should fail, and we should catch it here in the exception. Wait, that's wrong. Let's stop the code because we need to move this one here into this one. So you will notice save changes being used twice here and here. I'm going to have it in the finally block. Now run. The job should start, but then it should fail. It's running. Wait, this is the wrong file. Yeah, because we don't have any running jobs. Let's insert a new job. Stop, debug, hit the breakpoint. We have one job, basically. ID is, well, gonna delete both files. Now, if we run, we should throw an exception, error importing patients, and the file is no longer running. Now, if we go to the services here, copy this one, put it in the status one. Now we can run and we can see failed, and this is the exception, file not found exception with some details. There's a lot of things that you can optimize by doing multiple variation of checks and later on cancellation and so on. Let me know in the comment below. Do you need another video on how to implement this advanced stuff like cancellation, retries, some kind of retry on demand or something like that? Let me know in the comment if you need this to be included in a future video. And that's how you can create your own long-running process by implementing importing jobs using background service. If you want to check how hybrid cache works, click my video here.